I was tagged in this post. Since the dawn of time, the mediocre have perished. Open your eyes before it's too late. And he posts his testosterone levels to prove he's not on steroids or TRT.
I just want to say something to more plates. Listen, I have nothing against you. I appreciate the video. Yeah. I understand that you're an expert in the field. I am not. But I'm certainly an expert in my own life. And I'm telling you, I ain't taking nothing. Now, if anybody doubts me.
That's my issue with Tate. He's just a fake Natty guy who lies about steroids.
Is Andrew Tate Natty or is he not?
Is Andrew Tate on steroids or not?
This is why Andrew Tate is on steroids.
Oh, is Tate guilty? Is Tate not? Tate's like, you can give me a drug test. I will take a drug test and I will get $50,000
from the grave of our father that he's never taken a steroid.
They look at me without a shirt on. They're like, "Wow, you're big. What do you take, bro?"
I will offer here right now. We're gonna do a $50,000 bet. We'll put the money in escrow in Bitcoin, $50,000 each, and I will do any test you name with any doctor.
What's up, guys? Derek, moreplatesmoredates.com. Today we're doing a full-blown dissection of upwards of $15,000 worth of blood and urine testing done randomly to drug test Andrew Tate and his brother, Tristan Tate. There's been a lot of speculation about Andrew and if he's on steroids, and there has been for years, as with Tristan. So with Andrew, he's always been in shape, and sometimes he'll post random pictures on Twitter or, you know, wherever he's allowed to be posting at the time. Like I guess years ago it was on Instagram and stuff. You know, training, he'll get like the oddball pic where he just looks like a goddamn IFBB pro essentially. And, you know, these will cause rampant speculation about if this guy's natural, if he's enhanced. The guy literally went to prison and then came back and still looked, you know, pretty yoked. And at some angles, you know, he looks like he could be, you know, a fitness model or like a borderline. Like it looks like he bodybuilds more than a lot of people who are actively trying to gain muscle and just, you know, not seeing the results that look anything resembling that. You know, he's in the Natty or Juice subreddit often, getting accusations thrown around with highly engaged threads. Here's another one right here. And this was actually the picture that spurred a post he made, I think, where he was talking about his, or here's a before and after too. Young Andrew Tate physique during his peak athletic career versus old Andrew Tate at 36 after he retired and lives off fast food and pizza, 100% steroids. So there's the before, quite the flattering pic he chose. And the after, looking saucy as him is, buddy. Even recently, this picture got 33 million views. The guy just eating his dinner and circling, you know, some pimples on his arm is what people are thinking. Spoiler alert, it's called steroids. After responding to the Fireblood page saying how his test levels are over 1,000. At 38, he is surpassing the average 18-year-old in test. So, you know, this post got tons of engagement, 33 million views, 2,400 comments. One of the top ones, haha, duh, all these high T alphas are on TRT, which means they are low T individuals. That's not TRT, that's juicing. TRT gets you to normal levels and improves mood, energy, cognitive function, etc. He's taking steroids at ridiculous levels, which fucks up your mood, energy, cognitive function, etc. So, there's tons of stuff like this, like 2,400 comments on just a picture of this guy eating his dinner. He has a couple, like, you know, dots on his arm essentially. And Tristan gets not as much accusations, obviously, because he's not as prevalent online, but similar. And they have similar genetics and are both, you know, 6'3", 6'4". You know, I think Andrew's 205 pounds, Tristan's like 230 or something. They get a lot of accusations. So, and it's not like they don't lean into it and troll about it as well. It's kind of what led to the first, even why we're doing a video right now, is the history of what happened. Basically, back in 2022, Andrew posted a blood test result on his Instagram to prove that he's not on steroids or TRT or any of the, I forget what he says here, but any of like the weak shit that weak fuckers use or something. It was basically saying that if you use gear, you're weak, and here's proof that I'm not using it. And I did a reaction video to the blood test results, just dissecting them. And at the time, they were really lackluster results. It was basically showing a total testosterone using an immunoassay for the methodology, which is not sensitive enough to get an accurate reading, as like we can do in the States with more highly sensitive testing and more scrutinous testing at that. And he didn't have a free testosterone level, I believe, at the time. Or he did have a free testosterone level. It was just disproportionately high, and that's what led to what was actually essentially my interpretation at the time, that he kind of screwed himself by posting it more than if he didn't post it. So it was like, you know, an unfavorable test to post because it didn't have gonadotropins, it didn't have, you know, lipid levels, it didn't have hematology, it didn't have kidney function, it didn't have any actual drug test results. Like, the whole thing was basically just look at my total testosterone, it's normal, and then here's my free T and it's super high. This is because I have fire blood, or like whatever the explanation was. And it was at the time, you know, a lot of people think that if you see a normal testosterone level or a whatever, it's proof of something. But I think you guys, if you've been following this channel for a while now, you probably know that a total T can be meaningless if it's not accompanied by an array of other biomarkers that underlie it to give context to what's going on from a like pituitary signaling standpoint. If your HPTA is not all assessed, you cannot really use anything as grounds to stand on for, you know, natural status, essentially, because you could be just literally even on TRT and people wouldn't know because you're not showing if you're shut down or not, which is what we're going to get into now, because we actually know at this point via highly elaborate testing and extremely sensitive testing at that. So no longer are we using, you know, Romanian immunoassay test results to assess his total and free T. We have, you know, liquid chromatography with tandem mass spec for his total T. We have equilibrium dialysis, the gold standard for his free. And we have drug test results for all of the steroids that we want to be checking for, as well as T to epi-T ratios, gonadotropins. We get into it all. So basically, he responded to that video at the time with an emergency meeting where him and Tristan basically, you know, talked about what I said in my video, and he challenged me. He said we'd put, you know, $50,000 in escrow with Bitcoin, and he would take any test I want, essentially. And that was kind of the last we talked about it, because at the time it was just not really realistic for me to coordinate high-level testing where he was in Romania. So I wasn't gonna, like, you know, be like, I accept and, you know, go do it. And to be honest, like, I wasn't really trying to challenge the guy either. I wasn't looking to drug test him. He just posted this testosterone result on his Instagram, said, look, this proves I'm natural. And then I just did a review video saying this is why it would not be proof of it. And then I gave my assessment if I thought he was natural, just based on the information I had. And that was kind of the end of it. So this whole, like, there was like almost like a manifested, not real beef, but like fake beef created through people painting a storyline on the internet between us, but there's not really any actual beef. It's more like I'm just reviewing shit. And then he says, you know, you want to test me? Fucking do it. I'm like, all right, well, you know, next time you're in the States, I'm thinking, you know, I'm gonna, you know, literally show up on this guy's door with a phlebotomist ready to go. So fast forward a few years, and this guy flies to the US. He goes to the East Coast, and it's the first time he's been back in however long. And, you know, what he finds when he arrives is me ready to go. I coordinated through my company, Merrick Health, to get over $15,000 worth of blood and urine testing done on him and Tristan. And in total, I think we took 33 vials of blood each, as well as urine. And so we sent a phlebotomist to his home where he was staying and filmed the entire thing with no cuts, to ensure there was no tampering with samples, there was no fuckery with the samples that was going on, there was no mix and matching, there was nothing. The entire thing was like a 50-minute raw HD 4K video where I filmed literally the phlebotomist arriving, going in the door, getting the blood and urine, bagging it up, leaving, and driving away to the LabCorp. And there was no cuts, no opportunity for any sort of fuckery to happen. It was as airtight as you could possibly get. So I was pretty happy with, you know, how it went seamlessly. I wasn't really sure how it was gonna go, you know, just on a whim, setting this whole thing up. And it was, you know, pretty expensive and kind of, you know, even one cut in the video could have fucked the whole thing up, because at that point it's like, okay, well, what happened? But the file was clean. I reviewed the entire thing extremely critically, and there was no issues whatsoever with the way it was filmed, the way it was set up, everything checked out. And yeah, so I was not worried about tampering with the samples. They all were accounted for as well, and took a while to get the test results back, because it's a pretty intensive thing to get the amount of biomarkers that I wanted to get. But you know, we got it, and here we are.
About 3 or 4 years ago, I was running my mouth and I was promising more plates, more dates. I'm on any kind of steroids or any kind of TRT or any kind of hormone replacement
Never happened.
therapy, no peptides, nothing. I said, I'm on absolutely nothing. And I challenged him and said, I'll do any test you say. And then when I landed in America, he said, are you ready to do that test? So here we are, we're gonna do it.
So for the first, however, you know, 5-10 minutes of the video, we're basically just, you know, getting the paperwork in order and making sure everything's set up and ready to go. He seemed a little surprised by how much blood we were taking.
Just make sure you have a strong enough needle, because needles tend to break when they touch my skin.
Okay. So I just check your order prior to coming here, and then I get all the tubes ready, so okay?
Wait, we're taking all of this?
Yes.
I don't have any blood left.
He looked pretty surprised to see, and he literally counted, you know, the 33 vials, started doing the math about how much blood that was to come out of his body, and how fast he'd be able to replenish it.
I'm showing the camera how much of my blood is being taken. Show all these vials. Have you shown this?
Oh, I have a wide shot of it all.
Wild.
I see it all. Can you count them for me?
1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. $33. I think Derek just wanted my blood. Like, it's like Blade. You know when they put Blade in the machine, they take his blood for the sacrifice? I can't remember, something. Anyway, blood from a real G somehow does something. I saw it in Blade. So Derek's got some plans. He's going to synthesize synthetic Tate blood.
Yeah, notably, you know, one of the things I did kind of want to see myself that I thought might be helpful to him indirectly, not that he asked for it, but just something that I thought you guys would find interesting, as would I, and then hopefully he does. I know that he has had chronically high blood pressure, and you know, previously his lipids have been pretty high. So I kind of wanted to see, you know, where he stood from a health status perspective too, to kind of get a high level on, you know, is there any sort of feedback that, aside from assuming he even wants to talk to me once I review these results, if they, you know, if they don't check out, he's probably gonna not want to fucking hear the rest of the video. But I also wanted to check, you know, the health markers too, and see if I could provide any educational insight to you guys for things to look for, and maybe him if he cared. So notably, when he's getting his blood drawn, even the phlebotomist notes how high his blood pressure seems. She says, do you hear that spraying?
Do you hear that spraying?
My heart works.
Blood pressure.
Spraying.
Yeah, I've got high blood pressure. I've always had super high blood pressure. But I see it as a good thing.
You have high blood pressure?
I've always had high blood pressure my whole life. I don't know why.
Wow.
I think it's just, but that's a good thing. That's a good thing. I've decided I've changed medical science. That just means I'm powerful. My blood moves around quickly, you know, because I think fast.
So this guy has maintained that he is natural. He's always been natural. He doesn't take anything, no steroids, no TRT, etc. And he maintains that sentiment throughout the video as well, consistent with what he's always said. And he seems pretty confident that you know, things are going to check out.
Look forward to the results to prove that I'm not on any steroids of any kind. I'm not on any kind of TRT, no HRT, no peptides, nothing. I do not inject myself with anything ever, and I never have in my entire life. What I do is I eat once a day, I train every day, I'm pissed off all the time, and the rest is just natural, I guess. Hello Kitty cereal and cigars.
Now, there's a few things of note to give as context, because they affect his blood work as well as the interpretation of it, pharmacokinetic profile of certain hormones, as well as just the general overview of things. Is this guy's lifestyle, diet, sleep hygiene. It's all worth noting. just to give a high-level overview so you know what kind of a guy you're dealing with, because it's not just, it's a very unique diet and lifestyle that the Tates both share. So notably, he says, in general, he's consistent in saying indirectly he says he has 1,000 milligrams or more of caffeine per day through the amount of coffees he has, and several cigars, and 1 meal a day. So, sometimes that claim differs. Like, for example, the most extreme I've seen is a tweet where he says, I have a bunch of medical beliefs that I have zero proof for. I refuse to read research because it's matrix garbage. Nicotine and caffeine are miracle drugs. The reason my test level is enormous, despite never taking any steroids ever, is 25 cups of coffee and 20 cigars a day. So 25 cups of coffee. Then here, he says, conclusive evidence that the health advice you read on X is bullshit. I am 37 years old, completely natural, on zero steroids or TRT of any kind, and I'm stronger than 100% of those dorks eating weird shit and avoiding shampoo. I drink 20 coffees a day and chain smoke, and I'll kick the living fuck out of you. Work that out. Now here, he claims 15.
All I know is that he knows way too much and drinks way too much coffee.
Tell them how many cups. 15,
no joke. We would sit at a restaurant and be like, 15. And then his brother was like, me too. And I turned to him, like, what do you mean, me too? He just ordered for everybody. He goes, no, he didn't. And I was like, so you want 1 more or 15 more? He goes, yeah, all of it. And I thought they were like over exaggerating. No. They drink a lot of coffee.
But are they espressos?
No, they're just black coffee.
They're just like regular
black
cups of coffee?
I don't know anything about
When I drink black coffee, it like accelerates my appetite.
Oh.
They don't eat till dinner. He's drank 15 cups of coffee deep with nothing in his stomach.
And then here, what seems to be likely the most realistic and measured answer he has had, he claims only 10 cups of coffee. And I'm going to assume that's closer to the actual number because it's not trying to be like on the extreme, of his claims, and he just seems a lot more measured in this interview. So I'm gonna assume it's probably like 10, and maybe he still gets upwards of 15 on a day when he just feels like, pounding it. But this is what he says to Tucker Carlson when asked about tobacco.
I love tobacco. So my diet is particularly strange, I've been told. I live on caffeine and nicotine. So I eat once a day. I eat dinner only. 80% of my calories come from meat. I have 10 cups of coffee a day and 3 or 4 large cigars. So I like caffeine and nicotine.
I do too.
Yeah, it makes me feel good. Makes me feel like my blood's on fire a little bit. Caffeine and nicotine I think are fantastic.
But you're a health guy, obviously.
I'm a health guy.
Yeah, he's a health guy, Tucker. You fucking, of course. Why would you discern otherwise?
Derek's gonna watch this and be like, there's no way they're just pounding coffee and cigars right after getting.
Do I do this every single day?
Every day. Can't
Thank you very
confirm.
much. It's the life I live, Derek. I'll show you fucking health advice.
All right. Morning routine.
Morning routine.
Cigarette.
So you think you know good morning routines? You think the Ashton Hall or the Hubermans, have a, I don't know why I say the Hubermans, like there's more than one, but Huberman, you think they have a good morning routine? You have not seen the Tate shit.
Gorilla Mind Rush, Brain Force, okay?
Voice is controlled by the brain, that's science.
Well, Jägermeister used to actually be a medicine. You can't drink that much. What the fuck is this? Isn't that expensive?
Yeah, Chivas Regal, 18 years old.
18-year-old whiskey. This is not gonna, there's no way on earth this is gonna cure anything.
So one thing he does mention in the Tucker interview, the fucking clip's hilarious. The one thing he does mention in the Tucker interview is the impact of nicotine on testosterone levels.
You're a health guy, obviously.
I'm a health guy, but smoking is fantastic for your testosterone level. And I think that's important in a man. I think that's also important in the resistance of slavery as a whole.
Is it really, you can feel it?
Oh, 100%. And I'm not saying that, smoking's healthy. I'm not saying that, because I also train exceptionally hard every single day. And when I was professionally fighting, I didn't smoke. But I think in general, testosterone level is a fantastic way to measure your overall health as a man.
But nicotine has a positive correlation to testosterone.
Absolutely,
levels.
it's been proven. Yep, it's been proven repeatedly.
Okay, so let's break this down just so we have full context. Once we dig into these blood test results, those are some general statements that aren't completely untrue, but they deserve some context before we dig in more. So there is literature that does indicate a potential positive association between smoking and testosterone levels. However, the specific mechanism with which elevated cotinine may, and this is, a byproduct of nicotine in particular, not the, tobacco, may lead to an increase in total test remains uncertain. So this is literature from 2024, reviewing data from 2011 to 2016. And, like wherever you look, you're going to find this positive association, but it's not like smoking. First of all, it's probably the nicotine. And then second of all, it is probably misconstruing of what on paper levels necessarily mean. Because you could have, for example, a total testosterone level that goes much higher as a result of being on a literal transgender anti-androgen. Like you could take an anti-androgen and block the androgen receptor from preventing testosterone from binding as effectively, which in turn increases your testosterone. Does it mean that that is a good thing though? No, of course not. Like that would be less activity of what the actual testosterone is doing. And you could otherwise be making more testosterone in some people if you're taking certain things to make up for the fact that you're not getting the actual biological activity that you want out of that hormone, so your body's compensating. So it's not always a good thing to have more testosterone, but notably in that literature that I just pointed to, the mechanism by which they think one of the reasons why it could be increasing testosterone is through the inhibition of testosterone's metabolism. So specifically, nicotine and its primary metabolite, cotinine, are metabolized by the uridine 5-diphospho-glucuronosyltransferase, UGT superfamily enzyme, specifically UGT2B10 for nicotine and cotinine, and UGT2B7, UGT2B15, and UGT2B17 are responsible for metabolizing androgens, and there is a potential for competitive inhibition of androgen glucuronidation by nicotine and its metabolites, leading to an increase in androgen levels. So it's not like you are, increasing testosterone synthesis. Rather, you are literally inhibiting its breakdown and excretion, and as a byproduct of that, have more residual, floating around test that is not getting metabolized out correctly. In addition, other studies have noted that it seems like cotinine may act as an aromatase inhibitor. So you guys are probably familiar with aromatase inhibitors and how it interacts with the aromatase enzyme to prevent testosterone from aromatizing into estrogen, or estradiol, I should say. Therefore, indirectly increasing your test levels. Now, is this necessarily indicative of performance enhancing outcomes? Is this actually useful in any sort of capacity? What impact does it have on free test? The main thing you'd want to know. Well, literature on that suggests that although, total T increases, when evaluating associations between smoking, sex hormone levels, and other metrics of note in this 2021 paper, I believe, and other literature, you'll find associations between smoking and increases in SHBG. So if your SHBG is going up, but you have a higher total T, does it really matter? What if you have a disproportionately lowered free T now? So despite your total T on paper being higher, you don't actually get to use it necessarily. That is of note. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that's what happens, but just because your total T goes up because you inhibited aromatase, maybe you inhibited the metabolism to some extent, if your SHBG is higher, or you are just increasing residual androgens, it doesn't necessarily mean you're getting the full-blown activity at the AR that you would think, okay, more muscle now. I'm enhanced because I'm smoking. Probably not the case. Another thing of note, nicotine suppresses appetite and slightly increases metabolism. So smokers are, on average, 6 to 10 pounds lighter than non-smokers, even when adjusted for other variables. So, and in addition, caffeine also increases total energy expenditure per day, will result in a leaner body composition. You'll probably eat less. 1-2 punch to eat less food. There's a reason Tate can eat one meal a day and not be hungry through the rest of it. It's, burying fucking tons of coffee and nicotine. That's probably the reason why. And yeah, it's a lot easier to stay lean when you're doing that. And indirectly, if you are lean year round, but not malnourished level lean, you will have a higher testosterone than you would if you were, multiple percentage points higher body fat percentage within a a realistic leeway. Obviously, if you're too fat, you're going to inhibit your testosterone production through increased aromatase, which then on the back and just being metabolically unhealthy. But on the flip side, if you're too malnourished and you're depriving yourself too much, you're going to have lower test levels from lack of substrate to actually make hormones, because you're essentially in starvation mode. But the happy medium, if you are lean, athletic, muscular, you can have an optimized T level via the lack of negative feedback, but also enough nourishment to actually produce enough hormones simultaneously. So if you are eating less and you weigh less and you're less fat, you're likely, if you're not pushing that excessively or overtraining into the abyss and doing excessive amounts of cardio, likely going to be a higher test level via your improved lifestyle / diet, essentially, not because necessarily cigarette smoking, smoking in general could indirectly achieve the net reduction in food intake that you are then conflating, cigarette smoke equals, test levels increasing. We know that from a health perspective, objectively, it's not the end of the world to have cigars once in a while, but without question, more smoking equals higher risk of both atherosclerosis and cancer, and then as well chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And I got this from Peter Attia, a pretty damning statistic. Cardiovascular disease risk reduction based on the Framingham Heart Study within 5 years by ceasing smoking. These are existing smokers. Risk of cardiovascular disease dropped by 39% after 5 years of ceasing smoking. After 10 to 15 years, cardiovascular disease risk is nearly identical to never smokers. So imagine that, even if you were smoking for, a while, stopping it, you can actually get back to near or actual baseline compared to non-smokers, which is pretty awesome and gives a lot of optimism to those who are, trying to quit, in my opinion, or those who are actively switching to nicotine, because we'll get into shortly. Nicotine versus smoking. Cancer risk reduction too. After 20 years of smoking cessation, risk of cancer is almost virtually equivalent to that of a never smoker. So it's never too late to quit. Past smoking history should not be an excuse to continue smoking. And notably, on the delineation between nicotine and smoking to get your nicotine, the result of a multivariable Mendelian randomization study published last year suggests the smoking-related outcomes for, disease onset are not due to nicotine exposure, but are caused by other components of the tobacco smoke. So let's just say, Andrew pivoted from smoking and just took straight nicotine. The main concern at that point is just, the impact on sympathetic drive, increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, sleep disturbance, which are notable, but less problematic by quite a bit than smoking. And this is typically not considered physiologically problematic in healthy individuals, but could pose a risk for those who have underlying cardiovascular conditions. And obviously this stacks quite significantly for those who are on over 1 gram of caffeine per day, which it seems like he is in perpetuity, essentially. So, with him, and you can only assume his sleep metrics could probably be better, given that he's perpetually hyped up on this shit. And but again, it's all, you can choose what you do with your life at the end of the day. And with him, if he absolutely refuses to lower this stuff or change his protocol with the way he ingests these the nicotine with his caffeine, there are some things he could do that would absolutely, for example, get the blood pressure in check quickly, and I think should be done. Fucking alarm going off. So just high level, because this is relevant for some of the blood work stuff we're going to get into, and the family history. So protocol changes mentioned, lifestyle and diet changes, micronutrients and minerals in particular that may be out of balance or deficient entirely for somebody who's eating 1 meal a day, which is 80% meat and essentially nothing else, and just coffee and cigs the rest of the day. You might be deficient in magnesium or potassium or a myriad of things, which we'll find out in the blood test results, which notably is a big reason why getting comprehensive, elaborate insights into your diagnostics is worthwhile, because you can actually take a targeted approach at that point to diet changes or supplementation, or pharmacology if warranted. I think, if all else fails, you might need an angiotensin 2 receptor blocker and a cardioselective beta blocker. There are other classes of drugs as well, and drugs are pretty refined now when it comes to blood pressure management. So that's not something anybody should be walking around with. Elevated blood pressure is not a good thing. It's gonna be the lowest hanging fruit thing to easily rectify as well. That will have a huge impact on you living a normal duration of life. Like that will absolutely destroy your cardiovascular health if it's not addressed. And then that coupled with what he has said himself is high cholesterol levels as long as he can remember, that's like a whirlwind of almost guaranteed atherosclerosis very early. And it's something that should be addressed, which we'll get to. So, and notably, safe intake of caffeine, 1,000 milligrams. I'm not saying it's safe, it's absolutely not what I'm saying, but something that should be noted is the upper safe limit for people who weigh over 200 pounds is not going to be 400 milligrams. So with Andrew, he's like 205, 210, Tristan, he's like 230 plus. They're not going to be subject to the same, if you're over 400 milligrams, then you're unhealthy. Like that's not, what is set for an average person that weighs like 145 pounds in some, review study from 20 years ago is not going to be the same stipulations that should be put on somebody who is an athletic, maybe fast metabolizer of caffeine as well, who weighs literally, 50 to 80 pounds more or something. So anyways, family history notably is unfortunate early passing of his father from a heart attack at 56. I think it is something that needs to be taken seriously. Some of this stuff about the blood pressure he makes jokes about, but it's something he's going to have to get under control in one way or another. And also if he's on steroids, then he's going to have to fucking stop that probably, which we'll get to soon. Sleep, notably, he claims he sleeps 6 to 7 hours a night. And his sleep routine is inconsistent.
How much do I sleep? I think I sleep like maybe 6-7 hours a day. I'm not a big sleeper. I'm definitely not a big sleeper. Well, when you're a child and you don't go to bed until you're really tired. But when you're an adult, you go to bed because you have to do things the next day. I try and avoid the latter. I try and go to bed when I'm genuinely tired. I don't think, tomorrow I have a busy day, better go to bed. Loads of adults go to bed when they're not tired. It's just a certain time. I don't give myself a bedtime. Even if I have to be up again at 6 a.m. the next morning, if I'm not tired at 3 a.m., I'll just stay up. What's the worst case that happens? Tomorrow I live a life tired? Who cares? Then I get a good night's sleep the day after that. So my relationship with sleep is very good because I don't sleep until I'm actually exhausted.
So I think you should get a sleep study done as well to assess how restful and quality his sleep is, because poor sleep will be another big detriment to his cardiovascular health as well as actual physical and mental performance. As far as the whole, blood testing process, drawing the actual samples, we kept the camera on the phlebotomist the entire time. There was no tampering, like I said. She labeled everything, no cuts, no nothing. We have the entire thing filmed. And then Tristan sat down because he has also been accused of steroids too over the years. And basically, on a whim, when I told them, hey, we're going to send these guys for Andrew, I said, if you want to, double up, I can get you tested too. And he obliged.
I don't know why I'm accused of being on steroids. I don't know. I'm a big dude, but if I was on steroids, I'd have better abs,
So he's 6'4", pretty big dude. For him, it seems like the accusations mainly come from a transformation he had after an injury.
I land in Florida. Derek hits Andrew up. Hey bro, you ready? I'm gonna send you SATA testing to your house. So they came around, took 33 vials of blood from me. My steroid accusations came from that 2.5 years of the severe shoulder injury when I got out of shape. So then when I started training with Alex, it's just like boom, 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 it all came back. My fucking back looked like Iron Man. And everyone's like, oh, this happened to Tristan in 8 months. And everyone's like, steroids. Yeah.
So both of these guys set off red flags for many people and claim Natty and end up, viral tweets, speculation out the wazoo, Natty or juice threads, they end up in. And it's understandable why some people would think that it's only going to be achievable through drugs when you see some of the pictures they show, especially that, that first picture of Andrew with his delt while punching, like that is literal IFBB territory level deltoids, buddy. So in case you were wondering, by the way, as far as which brother has vascular superiority, these guys are so competitive with each other. Tristan was bragging how he didn't even need to switch veins mid-draw like Andrew. He actually had to get a repoked in his other arm because the blood stopped flowing. So they made a competition out of it, which was kind of funny.
Am I correct in saying that if one of my veins does all of these vials, then my veins are better than my brother's veins?
Absolutely.
All right,
challenge.
Come on, vein.
Don't pump, please.
All right.
Don't pump.
Come on, Vane, don't let me down.
You won. You beat me. I'm not. I'll admit it. You beat me.
All 33 done.
But I don't think she got my best vein. She didn't get my best soldier.
Wow.
You should have got my best soldier. For him, you probably chose his strongest vein. With me, you chose my weakest. You know,
Wow.
Andrew, you can make whatever excuses you like.
Now I'm getting in trouble. I'm part of the.
Listen, someone needs to get yelled
I am
at.
part of that.
Someone's responsible for
I
this.
am part of the competition.
It ain't me.
No, listen, it's Andrew. It's all your fault. It was Vane for Vane, selected at random.
So as far as their demeanor, just before digging into the results, for what it's worth, they seem pretty confident. You know, I was not gathering a lot of paranoia or nervousness from them. This is, you know, the demeanor after their test results.
Alcohol to sanitize your hands.
Now, I don't know how intricate they think this testing is, if they think it's just going to be some dinky like testosterone test similar to what they've done in Romania or what, or if it was going to be, you know, blood markers but not be testing for literal drugs. I don't know exactly what they thought. Or if they just thought, okay, this thing's going to be bulletproof and we're clean, so what are we worried about? I don't know exactly what they thought, but they seemed pretty chill, calm, and collected. And like I said, you know, we got the whole thing accounted for, including the phlebotomist even leaving to get into her car and driving it to the LabCorp. So that takes us to the end of you know, the actual sample collection process, which checked out. Did not see any red flags for me that made me suspicious or think this could have been tampered with. And the results are legit to review. So let's get into the review of the results, finally. All right, so getting into the blood test and urine analysis. High level, just for some background stats and context on both brothers first. So Andrew Tate, born December 1st, 1986, 38 years old, approximately 6'3", around 205 pounds. I'm sure that fluctuates and gets up to like 215, 220 plus, but that's what's reported on the internet. Tristan Tate, July 15th, 1988 birthday, 36 years old, around 6'4", and coming in at around 110 kilograms, 243 pounds, as per his most recent statements on his self-proclaimed body weight. Family history, Andrew's lifestyle, diet, etc. Some facts worth mentioning again, just to reiterate. Training regularly, a lot of cardio as well through, you know, sparring and whatnot. Maintains a lean and muscular body composition, eats once per day, dinner only. Around 80% of daily calories come from meat, which it's essentially a carnivore diet as per his words exactly. Drinks 10 or more cups of coffee per day, yielding at minimum around 1,000 milligrams of caffeine per day. Yeah, depending on how small or big the cup of coffee is, of course, but you know, if he's having 10 to 15 per day, we can say it's safe to assume he's pounding a gram of caffeine per day, minimum typically. Also smokes regularly, upwards of 3 to 4 large cigars per day. Cholesterol always super high per his own words, and he doesn't know why. And I've actually talked to him years ago about this. He found it interesting and perplexing because his diet is clean. Ultimately, you know, I'm sure you could, you know, you might be shaking your head like, how the fuck could you claim a 10 plus coffee a day diet plus cigs and 80% carnivore is healthy? But it's like, in general, the guy is in a deficit almost essentially perpetually. He stays very lean, and the quality of the meat he eats is going to be good, typically, from what I am aware. And ultimately, you know, the calories and the body comp and sleep, I suppose, which is another detriment that we'll get to in a sec. But ultimately, like, his overall energy intake is healthier than the majority of people, and he obviously has the body composition and metabolic health from the blood test metrics that he's produced publicly to date to kind of show that. Like, there's kind of no arguing the fact that he looks healthier than most people. And, you know, it's not a coincidence that guys who are super lean and muscular, if they're natural, are guys who are typically pretty fucking healthy. So we'll see though. Is it, you know, is the gear doing all the heavy lifting? Is he on gear? You know, we'll see. One thing of note also, he not only has the high lipids, which are problematic potentially, depending on who you ask, But he also has had high blood pressure his whole life, as per the blood test, where his blood was squirting out, and the phlebotomist mentioned how loud it was, and he mentioned he's always had high blood pressure. So that's a 1-2 punch for, cardiovascular disease. And then also he claims he sleeps 6 to 7 hours per night. His sleep routine is relatively inconsistent, and he also has family history. So his father unfortunately passed far too early at the age of 56, suffering a fatal heart attack while participating in a chess tournament. You can't help but wonder, is there a genetic component to this, with Tristan and Andrew sharing in the high lipids, high blood pressure? How much of this is genetic versus, nicotine and caffeine induced versus, gear induced? Because obviously that has an impact on blood pressure, the RAS system among I say the renin, angiotensin, aldosterone system, as well as actual dyslipidemia through steroid use as well. Like, there's a lot of stuff that comes from that we can dig into. But at the end of the day, if you have a father that passed away at 56 from something heart related, you can't help but think that having high blood pressure and high lipids and smoking a lot and not sleeping optimally is like a ticking time bomb. But how much of it is steroid induced versus not, we'll get into that. So first thing, overt, obvious signs of anabolic steroid use. What can we rule out, or even incorporate into the what goes against him? We already know what his physique looks like. We've gone through some of the pictures of the most damning shots where he looks super juicy. This was one tweet of note that went super viral that I felt worth commenting on, because I kind of brushed over it earlier just as an example of a guy talking about him that went viral, and just the claims people are asserting about him. So here he's like eating his dinner, and this guy says, spoiler alert, it's called steroids, as to why he has a test level of 1,000, and he got 33 million views. That's wild. And he says that's juicing. Not even just TRT. This kind of a claim, circling something like this, or circling bumps on the stomach or whatever, I often see among those uneducated about hormones, acne, and especially among those who have never been lean. These are almost certainly lipomas or benign cysts. Like, for example, you can see in this picture here, the same spots on his arms, like these little nodules. These aren't fluctuating in where they're located. They're not showing up randomly in different areas of his areas that would be the most prone to acne, like the upper back, the areas that would flare from steroid use. He's not really getting these marks on, and they're staying in the same spot. Like, this is not, unless this was acne scarring, it would in itself rule itself out via the fact that they don't go away. Like, these are things that are always there no matter what. If you look closely in the pictures that he takes, you see these little nodules. And this is not something that is only specific to his arm. He has it on his lower back as well. He's very lean here, punching, and you can see almost like striations in his lats. And these little nodules here, these are almost certainly little lipomas or benign cysts, and this is not uncommon to see among guys who are very lean and have muscularity. You see this in the UFC all the time, guys who are weight cutting. What are those dots on his stomach? I've seen those in other fighters too. This is a thread on the UFC subreddit. There are tons of threads like this. This is just one I pulled as an example because this guy got super dicey for this weigh-in and water depleted, and you can see these spots all over his stomach. These are little fat deposits and nodules. And they even have some educated people here. When you get lean enough, you can see some fat deposits. Lipomas, they're called. I think the medical word is lipomas. Slight fatty growths. Very normal. You just need to be crazy lean to see them. Seen often in bodybuilding. So, yeah. This kind of a claim based on this is often going to be deriving from somebody who just frankly has not been lean enough to know that that is a thing that is common amongst those who are lean. So I would say you could use that, write that off essentially as something contributing to overt signs of anabolic use. The guy has pretty clean skin from what I've seen from a steroid use perspective. He does not have flaring back knee, from hell or something like that. The guy has like stuff you see on lean people. even naturals. Like, this is not uncommon. Now, getting into the 2022 blood test results. So these were published by him on his own accord and are worth dissecting. So this was back in 2022. He published a test from 2020. So this is basically him trying to exonerate himself to prove he's not on steroids or TRT, and he had whoever it is that oversees his lab tests, I guess, at the time, sent him a 2-year-old test that showed he had a total testosterone level of 648 nanograms per deciliter, and then a free test that was disproportionately high at 43.55, if I'm reading that correctly, picograms per milliliter, which is significantly higher than the reference range goes. Notably, this is a Bucharest blood test and was missing, you know, all the context you would need to prove you were natural, essentially. If anything, this blood test result kind of suggested the opposite, which is what we get into in the video. So, like, disproportionately high free testosterone, no gonadotropins, no anabolic steroid test results. Like, there was nothing to indicate that this wasn't just you're on TRT with a high free T, essentially, and a normal looking total T, and you think it looks normal because your total T is normal, so I'm going to post it and, you know, trick people. That's what a lot of people would have discerned from that, and that's kind of what I made the video on. There was no way to definitively say, you know, at that time he was natural versus not, and if anything, it worked against him. Now, moving to 2023, he got another test result done. This one was more comprehensive at the end of the year, and he actually sent this to me back in 23. And I never made a video on it, but it's worth noting because it gives more biomarkers to analyze that gives some sort of context for more scrupulously evaluating the drug test results from 2025 that we just pulled. So in 2023, he had a total testosterone of 891 nanograms per deciliter. So this is 90.6 picomoles per liter of an estradiol, which is 24.68 picograms per milliliter in the units that we're familiar with in the States. The testosterone, 30.9 nanomoles per liter, which is the 891 that I mentioned. But again, no gonadotropins, no anabolic steroid screening, no indication, like there wasn't even a free T in this. So this was, it was more comprehensive in some of the other metrics, though, which are of note. Like, you could see his lipid levels, you could see his metabolic health, insulin, for instance. He had a 6.5 fasting insulin, I believe. Where was that one? 6.5 insulin. This is not in English, so it's pretty easy to kind of like pick out the ones we're looking for. But okay, let's just go top to bottom. So creatinine at 1.51. But with the context of a heavily muscled individual, somebody who's training, somebody who's having a high protein diet, creatine, etc., not unusual given the other kidney parameters are in check. And then moving forward to his free T3, 4.6 picomoles per liter. Estradiol I already talked about, total T I already talked about, his TSH and free T4 all within the bounds of normal, and no indication of, you know, replacement therapy as well of those. And then moving forward to the hematology, nothing looked to be, you know, odd in that regard either. And his fasting glucose 86, insulin 6.5, so all solid metrics for a, you know, metabolically healthy individual. Maybe not optimal, but like pretty fucking close, I would say. And then he also had his lipids, which is of note because this is one of the things that he has mentioned is always high. So total cholesterol, 229 milligrams per deciliter, and a LDL-C of 169, almost in the territory of familial hypercholesterolemia, which would be something that, like, in itself, this is something that's like, you should have got this handled in 2023. You can only avoid the atherosclerosis impending doom that is likely to come for so long via being metabolically healthy if your blood pressure is in disarray and you have this concurrent near familial hypercholesterolemia level LDL-C. I would say if you're not also doing, like, you know, cardiac screening through imaging to assess plaque progression, which I'm assuming he's not doing, given he can't even get like the most basic of tests in Bucharest done I'm assuming he has no like imaging done to assess where he stands from that standpoint. And at his age, is a CAC score going to be helpful in determining that? Probably not. We would want to see something more sensitive and specific, like a CT angiogram, which we'll get to shortly, because again, family history should not be ignored here given the context of all the things at play. And if anabolics are in the picture, like, holy shit, dude, perfect storm of bad things. But it's not all bad. The guy's obviously in great metabolic health, you think, objectively, looking at its body composition, the insulin metrics, fasting, etc. And his hemoglobin A1C, I think, was 5.43%. I might have missed that, but it's on here somewhere. Hemoglobin A1C of 5.43%. Yeah, okay, so there we go. Let's get into, so we have an 891 total T, no free T measured, 24 estradiol, no gonadotropins, no steroids tested for, reasonable metabolic health from a actual capacity to handle glucose standpoint, but lipids in disarray and high blood pressure. So going on to the next blood test, we have the 2025 random test results. So these are, I think, the only credible results ultimately, given that they were random and done with the most sensitive of testing. So of note, those Bucharest test results, although he had a total T of 891 in that one test and 648 in the other, those are using ECLIA methodology, aka electrochemiluminescence radioimmunoassay, which is not very accurate when it comes to highly sensitive testing, in particular delineating between actual testosterone and things that could cross-detect. So by that, I mean, if you are trying to get the most accurate reading of a total testosterone level, you need to be using liquid chromatography with tandem mass spectrometry. And for estradiol, you also want to be using sensitive assay testing through LCMS as well. If you use immunoassay testing, like in that Bucharest test, you will not only have inaccurate test results. Now, again, for efficiency, turnaround, price, there's a myriad of reasons why immunoassays can be totally sufficient and should not be ignored or not used. But when it comes to assessing somebody's, like hormone use in particular, but also like somebody who's trying to assess their hypogonadal status, or somebody who is assessing how much estrogen they still produce in, an aging woman, for example. There's a bunch of reasons why you would want to get sensitive testing. And when it comes to somebody who is suspected to be on hormones and anabolic steroids that are synthetic, deriving from testosterone in particular as well, potentially, you are going to get cross detection from like even stuff that is not testosterone. So by that, I mean, if you gave, Andrew Tate DECA, and then you told him to get a Bucharest total T, even though his total T would actually be bottomed out to nothingness, on that ECLIA test result, it would show that he had a detectable and probably in range normal looking total T, because it's detecting DECA, nandrolone, as test. As absurd as that sounds, that's what happens. I've done, multiple anecdotal tests on myself that you can see in my, catalog of videos to showcase this, and with the exact same blood sample, where I would take, like, for example, nandrolone on its own, test my blood, show that there was no testosterone, essentially short of adrenal produced testosterone via, the blood sample, because I'm shut down on nandrolone, but then also test it using immunoassay, and it would show that, oh, your total test is in range and you're fine. And the same with estradiol. It's not reliable. It's not going to distinguish between synthetic anabolics, and also it's going to inflate oftentimes the perceived level through cross detection of actual endogenous compounds too. So like literally other estrogens will inflate your estradiol, and other testosterone metabolites could inflate your total T. So it's not the ideal test. Like, is his 891 a legit test because it was an immunoassay? No, it's not. So typically, if you're going to, make a guess as to if it's going to be reflective of accurate results, it is not uncommon to see inflated total Ts and estradiol levels from these, immunoassay tests. So, but they track, with relative accuracy. They're just not sensitive enough to be completely legitimate for claims, especially around natural status, in my opinion. So what did we test? So we tested for the most elaborate blood test panel that we offer at Merrick Diagnostics, aka Merrick Health, is just our self-service labs portal where you can order your own labs. And then from there, you can either get like a cursory assessment report of what the markers are and what they mean, and some sort of high-level suggestions on changes to make and pivots and protocol implementations and dietary changes and lifestyle interventions that you could do. Or ultimately, you could connect with a professional and then work with a medical provider who will oversee dialing you in essentially to reach your goals through diet changes, supplementation, lifestyle, sleep hygiene optimization, pharmacology if warranted, and then the provision of those pharmaceuticals if warranted, or the supplements, or whatever it is that is needed to dial in. That is what we do. Or you can just order the labs and you can just, see for yourself and interpret them on your own if you want. This is the most elaborate panel, 140 biomarkers for the blood. And then on top of that, we had a urine analysis done with literal assessment of anabolic steroids, and then an HCG. So in this test, the blood test, we had the sex hormones and thyroid status, heart health and metabolism, nutrient status, organ health, heavy metals, and brain health. And this is the laundry list of biomarkers you would expect if you are somebody who's a nerd. I don't know why I would expect you to know all these, but some of you guys watching are probably like, oh yeah, I know it's probably in there. It's the most, exhaustive of our panels essentially, but there are, tighter ones that are more budget friendly that are still good for getting a good assessment of what's under the hood as well. This is just like the over the top, super expensive and elaborate one that covers all the bases essentially. And then here we have our anabolic steroid screening. So here we have a myriad of compounds, the ones that you would expect, and then even some obscure ones. So EQ, boldenone, we have halotestin, we have D-bol, we have nandrolone, we have anavar, we have winstrol, we have tren, we have clen, we have test. We even have epi-T thresholds that we would be able to see, with reasonable, I could tell from discerning, was he manipulating the T to epi-T ratio to, make it look like it's a normal ratio when in reality he's using exogenous epi-T. We'll know that when we look at this stuff. So this is a full-blown urine analysis screening for anabolic steroids, as well as, is he going to be somebody is he using TRT? Is he using testosterone to super physiologic levels? Is he trying to fuck with the bloods to look like he is doing something and mask? Because there are masking agents in here as well. And then also HCG. Is he trying to stimulate intratesticular activity manually with an LH mimic that won't necessarily show up as LH on a blood test? We will find out. It's just pretty fucking exhaustive. And it was at random too, of note. So he had no time to prep for this. And if he did, he would have had to have like a literal guy on site ready to clean his blood out on a moment's notice. So, the guy literally just got out of prison recently and flew to the States for the first time in years. Was he expecting me to be knocking on his door with a phlebotomist ready to take nearly 200 markers from him and his brother? I would say probably not. So, I think this is about as legit as it can get. I didn't talk to the guy for years before this, and, I saw that he was flying in. I was like, oh, I wonder if he'll go for this. Because it'd be pretty obvious if he was trying to dodge too. So I figured, I'll be like, hey, we're coming. And he would either say yes or no. And if he said no, it'd be pretty obvious why. And he's into it. So, we'll see and get into it now. Now you have the context of what we're testing and what to be looking for, and I'll, give color to what some of the stuff means as we go through it. So, of note, I mentioned all the stuff, hormones, etc., high level what we are covering, but circling back to the sensitivity of testing, this is why the US, LabCorp, Quest, etc., is excellent, is because you can actually scrutinize some of the stuff with more intricate detail and actually delineate what is endogenous testosterone versus, cross-detected, inflated total Ts. So here we're testing for total testosterone using LCMS, MS, and we're also doing sensitive assay estradiol testing. So we'll see without a shadow of a doubt what his literal testosterone is, specifically without being inflated by other endogenous metabolites, or, you know, the boldenone that he might be on, or the nandrolone, or the whatever. Like if you're on tren and then you use, I don't know, like gonadotropin analogs to stimulate, you know, like fake intratesticular production. Like there's ways you could fudge this to be like on steroids, but have a normal looking blood test-ish, and we can weed all that out. So there's gonna be some things that I look at on here that, again, when it comes to reference ranges, you know, just be aware that the standard reference ranges used by most clinicians and labs are based on population averages. So normal typically represents the 2nd to 97th percentile of a population that is, you know, by and large overweight, sedentary, nutrient deficient, and just because of a value falls within the reference range, it doesn't mean it's optimal. So, you know, just because something's normal, it's relative to the general population in the US that is, you know, like 40% pre-diabetic, I believe. Like 2/3 to 3/4 of individuals are overweight / obese. Apparently a quarter of the population has NAFLD now, which is crazy, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which often goes overlooked entirely. So this is critical to keep in mind as context as well, because I may reference like within normal limits, but suboptimal, you know, throughout the rest of this video. And at Merrick Health in particular, when we evaluate metrics, we are going off of optimal custom targets that reflect the 98th to 99th percentile of health, performance, and longevity. So I'm not going to get too scrutinous on what exactly that means for all of these, but if you are interested in dialing yourself in to get that level of oversight and optimization, that is what we do. It's not just about, you know, falling into the dead center of a reference range or even a high normal, because it often is far more nuanced than that, which you'll, I guess, get a glimpse at right now. So vitamin A, this is something that, you know, again, falls within normal, but is not necessarily optimal. I don't want to dissect these in too much scrutinous detail, but, you know, could his nutrient status be a bit better in this regard from a vitamin A and a vitamin E standpoint? Yes, and it is also recommended to measure vitamin A levels directly, as levels of beta carotene don't always accurately reflect true vitamin A status. Just a side note, his levels are within normal limits, low end of optimal, I would say. Vitamin E, it's within normal. I would say optimal for alpha tocopherol is, he's probably within that. And then gamma tocopherol, I would say he is below optimal. TSH, this is something probably more useful for the natty or not discussion though. So T4, TSH. So this is your signaling hormone to actually produce thyroid. So when I say thyroid, I mean your inactive thyroid hormone T4, which then downstream will convert to T3 or potentially reverse T3, depending on a few variables. And we can use these variables to kind of paint a picture around the rest of the blood work and systemic functionality, and also binding protein production and some other things, which we'll get to. But basically his TSH looks okay. It's not, you know, optimal by the standard of, I suppose, somebody who's trying to dial in to perfection, but for somebody who otherwise is in good metabolic health, is not having a, I don't know, any symptoms or signs and symptoms of hypothyroidism, you know, the TSH is okay. It's going to be more reflective of this is okay though, based on what the free T3 is, which we haven't seen. I don't know why the LabCorp doesn't just group these together. It would make it a lot easier to read through them, so I don't have to jump between categories of things, but, you know, whatever. I'm sure there's a good reason why they don't do that. T4 free, you know, looks okay. Pending the downstream T3 conversion is good, and pending there's no symptoms. But notable because free T3 and reverse T3 will appear later in the report, and that ties into the conversation of SHBG production, metabolism, lipids. T3 is essentially like the direct regulator of metabolism, essentially. If you were to point to one biomarker on the blood test panels that would be reflective of that, free T3 essentially would be that. All but not, you know, all encompassing. It's, you know, a hypothyroid human will suffer in quality of life, performance, vitality, a myriad of things. If your thyroid isn't in check, it's pretty detrimental. But also, notably, the impact of his diet. So he is, you know, fasting essentially the entire day, and on a carnivore diet, more or less, this has a pretty significant impact on thyroid hormone metabolism and also binding protein production, which we'll get to later. And it ties into the importance of like targeted micronutrient optimization as well as just diet optimization in general, I should say. So getting into the CBC with differential and platelet, there's nothing really of note to own in on here that stands out when it comes to androgen use or doping. You know, typically I would look to, is there excessive erythropoiesis happening? Like even guys on like high normal or like, you know, borderline supra TRT will often note disproportionate spikes in their, you know, RBC, hemoglobin, hematocrit. Elevations are not uncommon, and you know, his whole CBC looks pretty within the bounds of normal, I would say. You know, there's a neutrophil to lymphocyte ratio that is flagged as high. To me, this would point to some maybe like systemic inflammatory activity, but ultimately this is a pretty, you know, unremarkable CBC that I don't think is worth dissecting in scrutinous detail. I might circle back to it though when we talk about some of the other stuff, but right now on its own, I don't see like evidence of like, I don't know, trying to clean his blood or anything either. Like there's nothing, not that I thought he even could because there wasn't any time to do it, but I mean, you know, it looks pretty unremarkable, and I would say we can circle back to it if I feel like it makes sense based on some of the other stuff I see. So comprehensive metabolic panel. So here we want to look at his metabolic health through his fasting glucose is solid. We have a 76 here, milligrams per deciliter. We have a creatinine at the top of the reference range, but not high and not something I would typically hang my hat on as something to be concerned of, given his other kidney markers are in check, which we'll see. But typically a guy who has high blood pressure, like you would want to be assessing with pretty rigorous, you know, assessment. What is your kidney function, your GFR, glomerular filtration rate, to make sure that you are, like, first of all, you should just be fixing your blood pressure, but also you want to see how much damage has been done, because that is the thing that is going to wreck kidneys. People who end up on, bodybuilders especially, who end up with kidney failure, it is a result of chronically high blood pressure left unaddressed. And I know he's not a bodybuilder, but you know, guys who have left blood pressure unaddressed for years, that's how you fuck your kidneys more than anything. So with him, everything looks pretty solid and decent balance of electrolytes given the diet model, I would say. Potassium, I would imagine you could probably be a bit higher on that, especially given the blood pressure, but kind of to be determined. And that's also just like a mineral micronutrient discussion. That's a bit of a tangent, but EGFR looks rough-ish based on his creatinine because it's an estimation based on that. But if we look to a cystatin C or a SDMA, we could see a more accurate picture of what's going on with the context of he is a muscle-bound guy who trains hard, etc. Liver markers look solid. Okay, moving on to Omega Check. This is flagged as this is rough, dude. 3.7%. Jesus. So notably, this is a test that assesses the combined percentage of EPA, DHA, and total fatty acids in red blood cell membrane. So it's like a real indicator of your omega-3 status, like via blood cell evaluation, essentially. And it has been proposed as a biomarker for risk of death from coronary heart disease, and seems to be pretty indicative of how likely you are to die. It's a pretty easy to fix number too, so it's kind of almost inexcusable to be this low unless you've, you know, obviously he's probably never been aware of what it is or that he's even low to begin with, because he's been getting these shitty Bucharest tests for his whole life probably, or for the majority of it. But a 3.7, so for context, most Americans have an omega-3 index of 4% or less, which is bad. In a recent review, I might do a video on this actually, in a recent review of omega-3 indexes in 19 cohorts and 45,000 individuals comparing coronary heart disease mortality rates, coronary heart disease mortality would have been reduced by about 30% just moving from an omega-3 index of 4 to 8%. So an omega-3 index of greater than 8% is associated with very low risk of sudden cardiac death compared to those with an index of less than 4%. Sudden cardiac death risk appears reduced by 90% in those with the highest omega-3 index, which is a wild statistic. And the evidence suggests that it's very important to get your omega-3 index up to around 8% minimum, but ideally, up to 10% plus. And on average, 2,000 milligrams of a true triglyceride form EPA plus DHA will shift someone with a baseline of less than 4 to an omega-3 index of above 8. So it's pretty easy to fix. You just take a high quality omega-3 supplement and boom, this is something you don't got to worry about anymore, essentially. So it's a test that we offer, at Merrick Health, and sometimes it changes. Like, it's not that popular of a test, so it actually gets phased out often by the labs that are offering it, and then we have to replace it with another one. But rest assured, whatever the most, the available test is that we can get will be on the Merrick Diagnostics site and will be incorporated into panels regularly. It just might not be called Omega Check at the time. I think this one might actually be discontinued by now. It says here, effective April 25th. Omega Check will be non-orderable. So by now there's gonna be a replacement up almost certainly, but it's something we take pretty seriously at Merrick Health, and it's one of the lowest hanging fruit things to fix, and it is highly impactful on cardiovascular health, like I mentioned, but it is, it impacts a lot of things too, like inflammation levels, mental health even, lipids. It's pretty important to be dialing that, in my opinion. So this is low-hanging fruit for Andrew for sure. It's just a matter of if he wants to take an omega supplement or if that's too bitch-made for him to want to do. I don't know. Some people are like naturalists and they like really don't want to take anything. So I'm not saying that just as a joke. Like some people literally don't want to take an omega-3 supplement, and that's fine. So if you're not going to eat enough fish though, omega-3 supplement, or if you're worried about, the mercury levels of the type of fish you'd want to eat or whatever, it's really fucking easy to get a high quality fish oil supplement. Like we made one at Merrick Health, or we sell one through Merrick Health that is solid. And then I made one at Gorilla Mind that is what I think is the best quality version of this kind of a product. It's what I use personally, and my omega-3 index is consistently like, I don't know, 9-10%. EPA, bottom of the barrel, dude. Yeah, you got to get on this. Keep going. Lipid panel, mangled, bro. Fuck. This is the same as last time, essentially. So nothing's changed from 2023, it looks like. Notably, we actually have metrics, though, that are indicative of genetic predisposition. Like we have an LP(a) somewhere in here, which we'll get to. An ApoB as well, which I don't think he's ever tested. But damn, yeah, like on a surface level first, we have a total cholesterol of 239. LDL-C of 174, so even closer to familial hypercholesterolemia territory, almost clinically qualified to get prescribed the most aggressive of PCSK9 drug therapy to lower that. So this is not something to just leave, even if you're metabolically healthy. We've seen that it is not immunity from cardiovascular disease via atherosclerosis. If anything, more recently, we've seen evidence that it should be taken seriously among everyone, regardless, and don't hang your hat on the fact that you have good fasting insulin levels or whatever. Unless you're doing regular CT angiograms, you're just not gonna fucking know what's going on. And even then, I still wouldn't hang my hat on that, assuming that you're assessing, with the most rigorous and scrutinous of detail, all the plaque, soft plaque that is accumulating and whatnot. Like it's something that almost certainly needs to be managed manually. If you want to be the most risk averse, but that's a personal decision. And here, I don't see evidence necessarily of HDL suppression via androgen use. So oftentimes you'll see guys on hormones, HDL suppressed below 39. Like it's pretty uncommon for a guy to be blasting and to have a high, not that 50 is high, but like it's pretty rare to see a guy with a 50 who is blasting androgens. Now guys on TRT, you could have a 50, that's not too uncommon, but note, it's even just being above 39, it's not super typical among guys who are like sauce and hard. So, and it's not necessarily something you can easily mask. Like you could take a shit ton of, nicotinic acid, you could take some cardarine, you could do some stuff, but ultimately, we're probably gonna see something in here that is reflective otherwise. So overall, the lipids are kind of the same deal as last test seemingly. Moving on to, let's see, iron panel is what appears to be a low suboptimal TIBC. Everything else looks okay. So the blood's capacity to actually bind and transport iron, primarily via transferrin, a liver-produced iron transport protein. Oftentimes we'd see like inflammation down-regulating transferrin production, which can lower this. So it's kind of like a soft biomarker that we could use for pointing towards like what may be systemic inflammation. Not necessarily anything in here that is indicative of hormone use though, but just notable nonetheless, as I'm kind of getting a bit of a picture of like a potentially an inflammatory state so far. So let's see, moving on. Copper, testosterone, here we go, buddy. All right, so we've got our total T. Finally, using LCMS, we have 859 nanograms per deciliter. So it doesn't look like the last one was too far off, even using immunoassay. However, his free test was way off. So his first blood test result that he had reported, well, again, it could have actually been totally legit, but I'm not saying it was like a fudge thing, but I just mean like the calculation of free T. If you're not using equilibrium dialysis or ultrafiltration, like you were ultimately doing a suboptimal means of calculating it, and then oftentimes it's going to be based on a suboptimal means of calculating your total T to begin with that was inaccurate. So this is the gold standard. Your total T, this is literally testosterone. There's no inflation via, synthetic anabolics or endogenous metabolites. This is the amount of testosterone he is producing from his testes. And this is the percent free test via equilibrium dialysis, the gold standard, 1.5. So a typical reference range for adult males, 1.5 to 3.2. So this is indicative of what we're going to see, I guess, later in this test as a high or a borderline high SHBG level, which is inconsistent with his previous test results back in 2020, where he had a, fucking 1.75x the top of the reference range free T. Here we can see his free T is 129 picograms per milliliter, which is about middle of the road. You could even argue a little bit lowish. Given he has an 859 total T, it is a bit low. So his 1.5% free T is like, typically you want to see like 2 to 3% free T. So this is another thing, is SHBG oftentimes will be suppressed via exogenous androgen use to some extent. So the fact that he has a 1.5% free T suggests that the diet, like this is kind of what an expected outcome I would see for somebody who is dieting the way he is. Like he is not overeating, he trains hard, he eats a very carbohydrate restricted diet. Like I would expect somebody like him to have a high-ish total T, but have a likely disproportionately lower free T because the lack of carbohydrate in ingestion and lack of insulin signaling. So it's not necessarily reflective of like bad hormone health or anything like that. It's more just like the diet model he has. This is a typical expected outcome. And guys who are on steroids, typically you would see kind of like a countering of that. Like the seesaw would be going back in the other direction because you'd have a bit of a suppression of the SHBG that would kind of like bring it, more to the middle of the road. And if you're on high doses of anabolics, like you would see SHBG would still get crushed even though you're on this kind of a diet. So the fact that it's not offsetting the binding protein elevations that you would expect from a carnivore-ish diet, to me suggests, like at least this looks pretty natural to me. But we'll figure out, like this is just tip of the iceberg for some of the stuff we're gonna be digging into. So, and by the way, total T, just to get out of the way, not the end all be all. Like I've seen guys with, 1,500 plus total Ts who are natural, and it was as a result of having, like a microadenoma on, their pituitaries or their adrenal glands, or, a myriad of issues that can result in, like typically if you have a high, like a 1,000 plus total T, like you almost want to be looking into problems at that point. It's not necessarily something to brag about if you're natural, because if you have a, 1,000 plus total T, you would almost want to be asking yourself, what is going on that is making my body need to produce this much testosterone to achieve the outcomes it needs to like be fulfilled? Because if you have like binding protein dysregulation, you might need to produce more total T to make up for the fact that your SHBG is so high. Or if you have androgen resistance, like minor AR resistance, you might need to make more testosterone to compensate for your suboptimal like transcriptional activity at the receptor itself. People who have like 1500 plus total Ts who are actually natural, like, is absolutely not something that it's more something to freak out about than to be like proud of, probably. So, you know, an 859, this is like, I would say within the realms of natural still, and kind of like the upper limit of not necessarily where things go supra, because like, you know, supra you're kind of like 1000 plus, but just because you have an 859 or a 950 or a whatever, it doesn't mean that by default you are better off. So I just want to put that out there because a lot of people don't understand that the actual activity at the receptor and like, you know, how much like how many muscle fibers you have from birth, like these are the things that are going to be the most impactful on what occurs in terms of how jacked you get or how good of a performance outcome you get. Like there are guys with 500 total Ts I know who are like way more jacked than guys who have, you know, double that are both natural. So it's not the end all be all. It's absolutely something to be mindful of though. Like if you have a 300 total T, it's not something to just say, well, you know, I've heard that total T doesn't actually matter. Like it's a proxy and it should still be considered nonetheless. And it tracks where a lot of guys where they're, you know, the low end of the reference range. It's typical to find guys who, you know, at some level you still need to have enough testosterone to get the optimal function. It's just your optimal function may otherwise already be satisfied at like, you know, 600 and your body determines you don't need more necessarily. So it's not like if you took exogenous testosterone and pushed it to 1000, you wouldn't get more benefit. That's not what I'm saying, but you know, ultimately your body will typically find a way to produce what it needs to produce to do what it thinks it needs to do, unless you provide inhibitory signaling that prevents it from doing that. So like if you're fat as hell, you might produce a certain amount of testosterone to achieve an outcome, you know, biologically, but then the amount of fat you have results in way more estrogen being converted, which then tells your brain we have enough estrogen, so turn off the test. And then other things suffer as a byproduct of that. And it can be a vicious circle. But for, you know, otherwise healthy men, you know, like this is very good. And, you know, I would not say that, just don't get too caught up in the number if you feel good. If you have symptoms, you need to look into it. If you have low-ish numbers, I would look into it. It's something to keep an eye on for sure. And you want to know if you have, you know, liver dysfunction that's causing weird binding protein dysregulation, or if you had like a, you know, undiagnosed pituitary adenoma. Like there's a lot of crazy shit we find at Merrick Health, for example, and it's worth dissecting. But like, you know, if you have a 650 total T, don't get too hung up that you're not at 900 and think that you need to be on TRT. It's not the case. And we also, I wouldn't read too much into it, but something that is interesting is we actually have androgen receptor sensitivity testing now via Merrick Health as well. Is it going to be relevant or useful? I don't know, to be determined, but notable that that is the kind of stuff that is impactful on how much the total T actually works, as well as just the free hormone levels themselves. So sorry, I digress. Back to ADMA. So elevated ADMA are associated with significant subclinical atherosclerosis, while elevated SDMA are associated with kidney function and strongly correlate with reduced GFR. So these are kind of like progressive metrics that are useful for assessing vasodilation potential as well as kidney function via metrics that aren't as manipulated by muscle mass. So ADMA, asymmetric dimethylarginine, is a byproduct of methylation, and elevated levels impair nitric oxide production and often are elevated alongside homocysteine and LDL, and elevated levels of ADMA can increase the risk of heart disease, erectile dysfunction, kidney dysfunction. His is pretty high, like 97 is pretty close to 100, obviously. And to me, I would guess that later in the test, we will see high homocysteine as well. Like as homocysteine is elevated, it impairs the clearance of this. So, you know, I would expect that that level, there's something to do with methylation going on here that we'll parse out shortly, but basically if homocysteine is elevated and impairing the clearance of this, it is going to be indirectly via the elevation of ADMA as well, inhibiting NOS, which is the enzyme that actually acts as the catalyst for nitric oxide production. So you would actually be inhibiting your nitric oxide formation, and as a result of that, your vasodilation potential, causing maybe more endothelial dysfunction, vasoconstriction, blood pressure. You know, this might be one of the underlying reasons why he has such high blood pressure all the time. It definitely aggravates atherosclerosis development and is a problem. So it's an independent risk factor having this elevated. It's not elevated on paper, but it's pretty fucking close. So I think we're gonna probably see a high homocysteine, and then with that, I would probably discern that he's gonna need to lower it via, you know, like methylated B complex, creatine supplementation, maybe some betaine anhydrous on top of that. Those are all going to be really impactful on supplying adequate methyl donors and getting these homocysteine level down, and then in turn getting the ADMA down, which in turn will allow him to get more vasodilation potential, which would then allow him to lower his blood pressure, hopefully. That's an easy fix too. So that is something that goes totally overlooked by Bucharest tests. SDMA. So this one is not bad and is seems to be a more accurate marker than cystatin C for individuals who are heavily muscled, can actually distinguish more favorably in a state of inflammation as well. Like basically when you get a GFR assessed, it's an estimate. Like you're not actually getting your glomerular filtration rate assessed on these blood tests. You would do that through an inulin clearance. That is like the gold standard test that these then are used as a reference against for their validity and accuracy. And, you know, creatinine estimated GFR is like, I don't know, the least sensitive and reliable for individuals who work out and have any muscle whatsoever, supplement with creatine, have high protein diets, etc. Whereas cystatin C is far more reliable and accurate and tracks very closely with inulin clearance tests, as well as SDMA. But SDMA is minimally influenced by obesity as well, gender, age, polycystic ovarian syndrome, muscle mass, diet, inflammation, diabetes, estrogen therapy. I think there's like an array of things that it's might be superior to cystatin C in regards to, but it's a little bit of an experimental test as well. Like it says here, it has not been cleared or approved by the US FDA. The Cleveland Heart Lab is regulated. Should not be regarded as investigational or for research. So anyway, 114, like his SDMA is solid. This is good to see though, because, you know, the guy's high blood pressure. You wouldn't be worried that his, you know, kidney function is a mess, and it doesn't appear to be too bad. And other markers on here appear to be supportive of that as well. Getting into the B12 and folate. So folate, almost low, which tracks with what we just talked about when it comes to methylation capacity. His B12 could maybe be higher too. So he's not technically deficient on paper, but, you know, pretty close to it, and would absolutely fall below what would be considered optimal in Merrick Health. So he needs to increase his he could either take a, you know, a B complex, like a methylated B complex, or he could change his diet. But I mean, I suspect it's going to be easier to just, like, you know, add the vitamins in and get that to where it needs to be. But yeah, this folate level, I would say especially, needs to be higher. And it looks like his methylation needs support. All right, here we fucking go, buddy. Gonadotropin output. This is what you guys have been waiting on, as have I. LH and FSH, middle of the road, 5.5, 5.6. So notably, these numbers elevate with age. Is that an indication that somebody is, you know, progressively doping more as they get older or something? No. Hopefully that's obvious. But like, similar to when women hit menopause and all of a sudden LH and FSH skyrocket to like scream to signal to produce hormones, and it's just not responsive. The same happens in men, just to like a more muted extent and more gradual. LH and FSH will rise in response to inadequate response at the testes. So if you are like understanding the HPTA, you have gonadotropin releasing hormone that will, like, the hypothalamus will signal to the pituitary, and the pituitary via the GnRH, the gonadotropin releasing hormone, will produce an amount of LH and FSH that signals to the testes to actually produce intratesticular testosterone and, in turn, have spermatogenesis and actually have the full suite of, sperm production and, produce the testosterone you rely on for all androgen-driven functions and the aromatization to estrogen, DHT production, all that stuff. So LH and FSH are going to be produced contingent on what you need to signal to get the output you need at the organ. So if you have degraded response, you will have a higher LH level to compensate, to tell the Leydig cells harder, essentially, signal to a greater magnitude, like make more test, because we don't have enough. So a higher LH and FSH isn't always a good thing, and in an aging male, it's not uncommon to see this level track upwards. Having a 5.5 and a 5.6 looks natural, and to produce an output of a 800 and whatever it was, what was this total T? It was like 850 or 860 or something. To produce that T level, that's solid. So an 859 total T via, a very, a 5.5 modest LH. Obviously this fluctuates, this is just a snapshot in time ultimately, but this looks normal, If he was using, what we should talk about is like the use of GnRH agonists, SERMs, gonadotropin analogs, all that stuff. We're going to weed out when we get into the HCG as well, but, is there any sort of manipulations happening here where he has achieved, been able to dope while also maintaining the fertility metrics? Like, in turn, we would see LH bottom out if he was on HCG. So I'm assuming we're not going to see an HCG detection, but we'll find out soon. So then it would be the case of, is he using like an HMG to replicate these levels, which I would suspect not the case given the complete short notice that was given and the lack to plan around this, and what is the likelihood that somebody's doing HMG for TRT anyways, which is like urine purified LH and FSH, like women's urine purified LH and FSH. Almost no one's using that. Anybody who's going to be using gonadotropin mimics essentially or analogs is going to be using an HCG with a recombinant FSH at most. Most guys, if they're even doing that, would be using an HCG with their test. And then most guys are just doing TRT, which we would see the bottomed out, gonadotropins from somebody on TRT or somebody enhancing. And, at least up to now, like I don't see any evidence of, fuckery. So this looks normal to me, and kind of what I would expect for natural levels. And I would suspect, I think it's fair to say, he's not going to be on a GnRH agonist. No one's going to risk castration to try and maintain a, normal looking output of gonadotropins, not even having any clue they're ever going to be tested. So, at that point, you're kind of talking about, is this guy on HCG with his test to like look normal? But again, like your gonadotropins would all be mangled then too. So could he be on HCG on its own? Like, we're talking about like the most minute of, are you even in enhancement territory at that point if you're on like a SERM or like a whatever to make it look like you are natural when you're not? Like, I think in the context of this discussion, what people want to know is this guy on steroids, or is he on supratestosterone, or is he on TRT? Not, is he replacing his total T to like, natural with a free T that is borderline like disproportionately deficient with a Clomid or an N-clomiphene. It's almost not even like relevant at that point because it's not performance enhancing relative to what would otherwise just be like normal natural production anyways. So I don't see any evidence of like ergogenic enhancement yet, but we'll see, because there may be a way around this if we get into the testosterone dissection and it turns out it is exogenous via the testosterone to epitestosterone ratios and some of the steroid detections. Because again, like obviously none of this shit ultimately is going to account for like, I don't know, like synthetic anabolics you would, see artifacts of maybe in like the aberrations in your HDL and, the SHBG and whatnot. But like like I said, we're discerning between actual testosterone here, so you're not going to see the inflations if you're using like a tren or an androgen alongside it, but we'll see later. So right now, as far as like actual TRT, I don't think he's on TRT. I don't think he's on super test for sure. And from what I can tell, I don't think he's using HCG. I don't think he's using an HMG, likely. And I don't think there's SERMs in the picture. And even if there were, I don't think it's really relevant to the discussion. So he's not like enhanced that I can tell so far. All right, pregnenolone 21. It's not really even relevant to discuss. No one really knows exactly what this should be, but I mean, you know, it's ultimately a precursor hormone in the steroidogenesis cascade, and it's not irrelevant. I don't want to like make it seem like it is, but I will end up talking for fucking hours about this if I don't get on with this. So hemoglobin A1C 5.7%. This is interesting. So he is pre-diabetic according to this reference range. Now again, this is an average over 2 to 3 months of your glycation via your red blood cells. So to me, this suggests that, well, first of all, what was this other one? It was a 5.43% in the 2023 result. So it's higher. I guess we'll see what his fasting insulin is to see how insulin sensitive he is in this test result. But yeah, that's interesting. So 5.7. So to me, this indicates not potentially like slow red blood cell turnover. So like there's definitely not like, if there was even a suspicion of blood cleaning, I would have probably noted something in here as well as in the hematology. This is like almost old blood essentially, because he is on a carbohydrate restricted diet near keto likely, or it's like, you know, carnivore-ish. So if you have enough glucose floating around and subsequent glycation being recorded in your red blood cell metrics, to me that suggests that this is like really slow turnover or delayed. And I think this should be looked into more in terms of, we'll see his fasting glucose and his insulin in a sec, but he should probably do a follow-up with some other metrics just to see, or use a CGM to kind of assess why on such a carbohydrate restricted diet he has a high hemoglobin A1C. But yeah, we've seen before that he's had a normal one, so this might just be a blip. Who knows? The guy is like literally redlined sympathetic drive-wise perpetually. For all we know, he is just like consistently noradrenaline releasing fucking glucose into circulation constantly via his nicotine and caffeine use, and just being in like what's he say, he's like at war in his mind or some shit. Like he's you know, he's obviously like I imagine you would be like in a state of perpetual heightened stress to some capacity if you are like redlined on that much stim, and if you're not sleeping enough, like it's also more difficult to, you know, actually dispose of glucose effectively. So he's, you know, sleeping 6 to 7 hours a day. How restful and deep is that sleep to begin with, given the guy is like literally working out like caffeine from 2 days ago still when he gets to sleep every day? So like, fuck, man, like I think it's explainable. I just think it's odd. But to me, if anything, it suggests, you know, the blood is his blood more than anything. Like there's no evidence of, you know, blood donation, EPO, reinfusion, hemoglobin dilution. Hematocrit looks normal, like I said. No acute blood manipulation signs that I could see. So not ideal for health, maybe, but like it's probably an indirect byproduct of like, I don't know, acute cortisol dumps and like being heightened, like perpetually adrenergic from his insane stim use. And I also don't know what the rest of his diet is. Like it's, you know, 80% carnivore, but like what is the other 20%? I guess we'll see if we see ketones in his urine, if he is actually full-blown carnivore or not soon. But yeah, pre-diabetic hemoglobin A1C, he should probably look into that just from a health perspective. DHEA sulfate 252. normal. You know, you can argue if that's optimal or not, whatever. It's not that relevant to my opinion right now. Cortisol, 11.5, fasting. I would be using like saliva probably if I'm going to be doing a cortisol assessment. I don't read too much into the blood tests for cortisol. So prolactin, 8.3. This is just a snapshot in time, by the way. Like we would want like an actual like over the day cortisol reading through saliva. That's what I would typically look to. Let's see, prolactin. Like it's not irrelevant in the natty or not discussion. It's worthwhile to note, but it looks okay to me. Notably, this is something that people with unexplained kind of like, it's uncommon, but like it's not. At this point, we've seen quite a few cases of people with undiagnosed pituitary adenomas or prolactinomas. So worth noting that, you know, Merrick Health has caught a considerable amount of these and treated them successfully. So, you know, people that have, you know, halted development in adolescence or otherwise are like seemingly unexplainably low T, like there are things to look into, and is why you would work with a professional company like Merrick Health to discern and kind of dig out some of the stuff that you might have no idea is there. If you have like a micro tumor that is like shooting out prolactin, could be screwing you over in a myriad of ways. And it could be totally treatable. Like many of these individuals who work with Merrick Health to get this fixed too had low T for years and persistent low T symptoms and were never screened for prolactin by even endocrinologists and specialists that they saw. So it highlights the importance of like broad spectrum diagnostics interpreted by people who actually like know the full suite of what to be looking for, in my opinion. Prostate specific antigen. I mean, probably not worth digging into. IGF-1, like it's fine. IGF-1, 155. So is he on HGH? Not that it looks like to me. So if you were using HGH to get up to a 155, your HGH either sucks or you're not using very much or you're not a significant IGF-1 like converter at the liver, I guess. But I mean, yeah, we would probably see other metrics that would point to it being clear versus not, that he is versus it. Like to me, this looks totally natural. So yeah, I'm not too concerned about that, but worth noting as a thing to revisit potentially. Reverse T3, so this is interesting, 26.2 nanograms per deciliter. So I mentioned earlier briefly, I don't know if I actually defined what it is, but I might have just mentioned it, but reverse T3 is like an inactive form of thyroid hormone that is produced in the body. And when you have T4 converting to T3 or reverse T3, it can be problematic if you have a heightened amount of reverse T3 because it is essentially an inactive form of T3 that can bind to the same receptors as T3, but doesn't activate them. And it's kind of like a, I don't know, like a brake, to like a, you know, you have a gas pedal T3 and you have like a brake pedal, which is like reverse T3. Might not be the best way to describe it, but hopefully it somewhat illustrates why it would be even produced to begin with. But basically it can compete with T3 at the receptor site to reduce the amplification of like T3 function. So kind of like preventing overstimulation and keep your, I don't know, metabolism in check, I suppose. But it can get dysregulated when there is significant inflammatory activity, which is affecting the downstream deodorinase expression. So deodorinase enzymes are the ones that are responsible for actually converting the downstream thyroid hormones into their active forms. So you could have a discordance between, you know, TSH levels and free T3 when there is a heightened amount of reverse T3 that is competing at the receptor site, that is inducing a state of hypothyroidism even in the presence of what looks to be adequate T3 levels. So this is kind of like if you were using, I don't even know if it's a helpful analogy, but like if you're using like an anti-androgen while you're on, that is like competing with your testosterone. So like a transgender, somebody's trying to transition, they might use an anti-androgen. So it's like their testosterone levels look normal, but they are preventing the testosterone from working at the receptor site. That's kind of what T3 does. It's like an anti-T3. It like is a anti-thyroid hormone that prevents as much T3 from activating and inducing transcriptional activity. But I digress. So, you know, there is different tissues that regulate thyroid hormone activity through these deiodinase or deodenase enzymes like D1, D2, D3, and, you know, depending on a myriad of conditions like nutrient status, sleep, metabolic dysfunction, inflammation, this can all suppress certain enzyme activity, and then also some might become disproportionately high, and it can lead to a mismanaged or, I don't know, a suboptimal profile. So him having a high reverse T3 is notable because it will impact his ability to actually, you know, get the ideal balance of thyroid hormone inputs, and also might be reflective as on the systemic inflammation that I mentioned earlier. So this is like another, I don't know, key to kind of own in on. Not necessarily indicative of hormone use, but I mean something to kind of like log. So vitamin D, 37.5, notably a steroid hormone, not necessarily just a fat-soluble vitamin. It is very impactful on many things, including bone health, goes overlooked. Even the capacity to utilize androgens effectively, so how well your body actually utilizes sex hormones, as well as the production of them to some capacity. This is a metric that I would say he is not suboptimal, probably. I think he should probably be closer to like 60, I would say. But it's, you know, again, subjective, but in general, it's not like the higher the better. I certainly wouldn't say like you need to be at 100, but I mean, he could absolutely benefit from a bit of vitamin D supplementation, I would say, or more sunlight, I guess, but probably more just some vitamin D supplementation. Let's see, lipoprotein little a. So the genetic factor that a lot of people don't realize is important to test for. So values greater than or equal to 75 nanomoles per liter may indicate an independent risk factor for cardiovascular coronary heart disease. So this is something that is not necessarily manipulated easily through diet. Like it doesn't really budge that much through diet, lifestyle changes, etc. It's kind of like a genetic predisposition that is, if it's high, you kind of then need to aggressively manage the rest of your lipid profile accordingly based on your risk. So you're not going to be able to crush this into the ground manually through drugs or through running more or through your diet changes, really. It's something that you then need to balance the rest of your profile accordingly based on the elevated risk that it puts you at. So it's good to see that he doesn't have this, because that would be like the final straw on like what is otherwise like a perfect storm, a perfect shitstorm of things when it comes to lipids and genetics. But it is not, he does not have it, so that's good. You got to check this at least once in your lifetime, so it's not something you need to really like track like other lipids. You would lipid markers you would need to be checking because they can manipulate very quickly through dietary changes, lifestyle, etc., to some extent, as well as pharmacology very quickly. But this is not going to change that much. So you got to check it though to make sure you don't have, you know, there are a lot of guys that don't realize they're one of the individuals who has a sky high LP little a, and they had no idea. And it puts them at like a heightened risk category that then all of a sudden now you have to be considering a bunch of other variables more scrupulously that you might have not even looked at with that level of detail otherwise. So definitely get that checked at least once in your lifetime. All right, so these are hectic, dude. C-reactive protein. So as mentioned, systemic inflammation. This is like the marker most people are the most familiar with when it comes to markers of like general inflammatory activity, and it can be transient, but given that he has a glycoprotein acetylation score of 469 as well, and then all the other stuff we talked about, and oh my god, dude, 15.9 homocysteine. Yeah, so like this whole thing, this is just like inflammation city. So yeah, man, like this is basically low, like systemic inflammation is what I'm gathering is a big factor here, and that coupled with the lipids, coupled with the blood pressure, it all overlaps, but it's all health stuff. So, you know, is steroid use going to spike these? You could have carrier oils that are, you know, from UGLs cause spikes in C-reactive protein for sure. This stuff can be affected, but, you know, for a guy who is as rich and connected as he is, he's going to be using clean gear. He's not going to be using shitty stuff. You know, this stuff is more indicative of diet, lifestyle, and maybe genetics, I would say. So this is a transient marker that, you know, what can we even discern from that that's of useful reference? Maybe nothing, but at least in unison with the other markers, like we can see here, this might be more notable in that, like, by the way, I don't even know, I think we might be one of the only companies that's using this marker right now, but it's a more modern and progressive metric to assess more like chronic inflammation over time, as opposed to this is more like transiently influenced. And with the other markers, it can just give you a kind of high level insight into where you stand from an inflammatory standpoint and what you maybe need to focus more intensely on. And yeah, the homocysteine too, like this guy needs to get on the methylated B vitamins train. Maybe add some supplemental creatine, some betaine anhydrous, see what he can do there. Maybe get some vegetables into the mix. So who knows, man? Maybe some fiber. I don't know what the rest of his diet's like, but you know, something's got to change from that perspective. And maybe just even sleeping more. Like maybe just duration of sleep will help some of this stuff a fair bit as well. The omega-3 supplementation. But yeah, this stuff is not going to be heavily influenced by the... I don't know. It depends what we see on the urine analysis, but we'll get to that. Let's get through some of this shit quicker. Sorry, I'm taking forever. So GGT, good. You know, this kind of like corroborates some of the other stuff earlier on the metabolic discussion that looks solid. It makes me more confident in saying his liver and kidney function is solid, and he has good, I don't know, antioxidant activity to some extent. TPO antibodies are solid. Fibrinogen, zinc status, progesterone, insulin. Okay, fasting insulin of 5.1. So he is very insulin sensitive, at least what we can discern from, you know, ideally he would have a, you know, oral glucose tolerance test, but I mean, fasting insulin of 5.1, it's pretty, from what we've seen, there is something that's leading to the high hemoglobin A1C that seems to not necessarily track with a reflection on his insulin sensitivity metrics. So at least, you know, from what I could discern, like this looks like a really good fasting insulin. So he is, I would say, metabolically healthy, but likely in a state of constant stress, inflammation, and perpetually sleep deprived potentially as well. And he should get a sleep study, man. Just see how much these stims are really affecting how restful and deep your sleep is. T3 free, 2.6, so not necessarily ideal, but, you know, is there symptoms at the end of the day? You know, that's going to be kind of the end all be all when it comes to, you know, do you have low body temperature? It's not very hard to tell. You can literally check it daily and assess over time, similar to blood pressure, and really see, you know, how much actual functionality are you getting out of your free circulating, you know, thyroid hormones. Magnesium could probably go up a fair bit, and I think that might help the blood pressure as well, and also maybe chill out his mind that is at war constantly. Help his sleep for sure. Sex hormone binding globulin, here we go, 54.6. We saw that coming. So borderline high. That explains the 1.5% free T, obviously. And to me, this is kind of expected for somebody who is on a carnivore-ish diet, you know, training hard, not eating a lot of carbohydrates. Yeah, so you would see this lower in an androgen abuser typically. Apolipoprotein B, the primary marker you want to look to aside from Lp(a). This is the one that is highly influenced by your lifestyle decisions, if you use drugs or not to lower it, diet changes, etc. And an ApoB of 122 with a borderline familial hypercholesterolemia, LDL-C, like, I think he should consider either some diet changes, but likely, like, how much does he want to, like, he's pretty set in his ways. I imagine he wants to continue smoking his cigs, taking his caffeine. you know, for a guy like that, the fastest track to fixing this stuff is going to be through drugs. So I would get this in check immediately via, you know, depending on if you would want to subject yourself to it, and certainly not medical advice, obviously, but if it were me, I would probably be looking at like baby statin therapy with, you know, ezetimibe on top, potentially a PCSK9 inhibitor, and just get the shit into range where it should be, and then deal with the rest from there and dial in. So a high blood pressure and an ApoB of 122, near 190 LDL-C, you know, highly inflammatory state. Guys just got to get this shit handled. But, you know, his HDL wasn't crushed from androgens, SHBG is high, testosterone levels look normal, free T is proportionally lower even than we might have expected. ADMA, SDMA, these are all things of just health to keep in mind. And omega check, we already talked about the omega-3s that he should be taking too. If he gets that stuff all on check, I bet he could rectify a lot of this stuff in a matter of weeks. A lot of this stuff, the impact could be, you know, negligible at his age. Hopefully, given he could get this under control pretty quick. But all right, so we have the assessment of endogenous hormone production, which looks solid. And I think this, if I was to go off this, I would say, yeah, it looks pretty natural, but it's like, what about the urine analysis? So let's get into the actual drug test metrics next. Well, let's look at Tristan stuff too, because I don't want to ignore it. Low vitamin E, low fasting glucose, interesting. If anything, decent omega check, but I mean, it's still bad. It's just better than Andrew's. But he should be supplementing as well, probably, or eating some fish. Let's see. Same deal, man. High total cholesterol, high LDL-C. Let's see. Total T of 860. Wow, it's like almost the same shit as his brother. 1.2% free T, even lower percentage than Andrew, with a 104 picogram per milliliter free T. So very strong total production with a like okay free T. It's just inhibited what I suspect to be partly through perhaps underlying inflammation, but also more than likely just lack of insulin signaling, resulting in higher binding proteins. So we're going to scroll down and probably see an even higher SHBG. ADMA at 89, SDMA at 105, better B12 levels, folate's a bit better than Andrew's as well. Signaling, gonadotropins, LH and FSH, kind of the same deal with a 3.2 though, a bit lower of an FSH. Nothing standing out as wildly different. Not pre-diabetic, so that's good. And again, it makes me wonder if the Andrew hemoglobin A1C was kind of just a blip based on, like, it is an average over months, so it's kind of hard to ignore, but they're obviously capable of producing normal hemoglobin A1C numbers, and they have good fasting glucose levels, good fasting insulin levels. High DHEAS, I imagine this is just a blip. Cortisol, prolactin, even lower IGF-1. So like we would see higher IGF-1s if they ate a lot of carbs and they ate a bit less meat, I would say. Because it's a lot of just lack of insulin signaling. Reverse T3 is even higher than Andrew's, so that's problematic, but more from a health standpoint and a performance standpoint, but not necessarily indicative of steroids or anything. Vitamin D, same deal kind of. LP(a) looks similar to Andrew's as well. Better inflammation scores actually, so C-reactive protein low, glyc-A much lower than Andrew's as well. High estradiol sensitive, so this it's like barely. It's, you know, based on a reference range as well, and he has a high total T. So like, how much do I read into that as anything? I don't. High homocysteine. Okay, the same deal. He's got to be trying some of the same stuff as his brother, I think. And again, a lot of this is kind of diverting into health stuff, but wow, 3.0 fasting insulin, like that's dialed, buddy. Yeah, so they are pretty solid on it's kind of like a paradoxical metabolic health breakdown, because it's like you'll see some stuff like the, you know, hemoglobin A1C, some of this inflammation stuff, but then they're like, they train fucking hard, they eat like good diets overall. Like the fact that they control their calorie intake, and then of the calories, 80% is like good meat. In itself, you're beating like everyone essentially. It's just like the smoking and the fucking everything else on top of that, you know, could be problematic. So SHBG of 73, man. Like you guys, if you had just a bit more, had some carbs, you know, you could get this down, you could get your IGF-1s up, you could get your free test up quite a bit. Like there's a lot of leeway for optimization, I would say, just from like a hormonal balance standpoint. And it would also drop the binding proteins of the thyroid hormones too, and free up some of that T3. So we don't have a total T3 here. We have a free T3 of 2.7. I'm sure we could get more free circulating, metabolically active T3 going through the binding protein reductions through some carbohydrate implementation, even if cyclically. ApoB 119, same deal, in my opinion. I don't know what his blood pressure is, but if it's like his brother's, which I can only... As far as what I've seen, like Tristan's actually probably even worse from like a just burying fucking copious amounts of caffeine and stims. But maybe that's just for show on social media. I don't really know. But kind of a similar interpretation. So that makes it easier for me. I don't have to go through this in intimate detail like the other one because it kind of looks similar. All right, here we go. Urine tests. Heavy metals. Looks okay. At a glance. You know, I would love to get a bit deeper on some of this stuff, and it would be worth doing. And I would recommend working with a professional to do it, because it's certainly not my expertise to dissect heavy metals, but I know people who have been heavily affected by accumulative exposure to metals, and it's been very impactful on quality of life especially. So it's worth dissecting some of this stuff. I'm just probably not the guy to do it. I would work with somebody at Merrick Health or another comparable in quality company, or somebody who specializes in this. All right, anabolic steroid screening. Balasterone, the compound that so many people use. Just kidding, it's pretty obscure. Boldenone, so no EQ. 4-chlorotestosterone, nothing. Danazol, nothing. Drostanolone, also known as Masteron, not detected. Fluoxymesterone. I'm actually like almost testing my recall of some of these drugs because it's been a while since I've looked at the chemical names relative to the brand names that they were initially released in. Halotestin, none detected. Mysterolone. God, what is that? Proviron, none detected. Methandienone, Dianabol, also known as methandrostenolone, none detected. Let's see. Methandriol, none detected. Methanolone, none detected. Methyl testosterone, none. Nandrol, nothing. Okay, so no Anavar, no Anadrol, no Winstrol, no Tren, no the masking agent, no Clen. Normal specific gravity, normal interpretation of T to epi-T. I'll be the judge of that. Let's see. So we got a total testosterone of 23.6 nanograms per milliliter, epi-T of 39, so a T to epi-T ratio of 0.6. Okay, so just so you guys know, like this is urinary excretion, first of all. So these are all via urine analysis. This is what like WADA would do to assess if there was a detection of these compounds. And then for TRT or testosterone enhancement, you'd be looking at this, and this is kind of where, you know, some of the infamous pops in the UFC have come from, as well as some other sports. But the UFC was like most prominent in actually reporting the numbers and like being very forthcoming about who popped and how they popped. I think Chael Sonnen famously had like some extraordinarily high T to epi-T ratio when he popped, or maybe it was I forget who it was. Somebody had like a fucking 60 or something. I think maybe Chael had 16 or something. I've done videos on it, but anyways, in general, this would be considered abnormal when it exceeds 4. So reason being is if you look at this chart, you can see cholesterol, and if you want to imagine all the stuff between cholesterol and testosterone in a steroidogenesis chart, you would see basically, you know, pregnenolone, and then the offshoots of, you know, progesterone and progesterone metabolites and DHEA, and down to androstenedione, and all the way to testosterone, and then the metabolites of testosterone through DHT. An offshoot of this, you would have, you know, estradiol and all the estrogen metabolites as well. But notably up here, you have epitestosterone. So this is not a byproduct of testosterone, so it remains stable, and it kind of acts as like the basis, the infrastructure to go relative to what is being manipulated here. So if this goes up in general, like you would see a disproportionate spike in the ratio because this is going to elevate, but it's not going to cause a elevation in epi-T. Rather, you would see a disproportionate spike in T to epi-T that is not necessarily influenced via negative feedback dramatically because it's an offshoot of upstream, kind of like adrenal steroids, offshoot metabolism. Whereas test, it has its metabolism into other androgens like DHT, and downstream to that, through different enzymatic pathways, etiacalanolone and other things. But the main one is this, because it's kind of like the one you can count on to remain stable and not easily influenced by the T level. So if you are using steroids exogenously that aren't testosterone, you would see this level typically plummet because you have negative feedback to the hypothalamus, which would shut down your testosterone production. And as a result, you would have a really low testosterone to epitestosterone ratio. So for example, if Andrew was on, I don't know, let's just say nandrolone, we would see in his blood work, we would have seen a bottomed out total T probably. But what we would have seen in here is a T to epi-T ratio. So something like really low, like when we see 0.6, that is not low. And even if it was considered to be low, you would then look at the concentrations to see is there a bottomed out urinary testosterone as well. And there's not. So like there's ways to kind of like math out and pattern recognize what is happening to assess if there is actually a shutdown or a use of synthetic anabolics that is going to be influencing the suppression of these numbers or an inflation of them. And from what we see here, there is no anabolic steroids detected and there is no exogenous testosterone being used. And even if there was, let's just say you had like a, I don't know, like a cholesterol derived testosterone that was like isotope ratio, like carbon isotope ratio proof testosterone, we would have seen the effect of that on the concentration levels, both in the urine as well as in his actual blood work. Like you're not gonna dope to a 859, whatever it was, total T with a free T of like, 1.5% free T. This is, like maybe in sports, like if you were like literally cutting into nothingness and you were trying to like make, a super lightweight class that would have absolutely crushed you otherwise, that is where like a carbon isotope ratio proof testosterone would be actually offsetting the attenuation in performance loss rather than being like ergogenic on top of baseline. For the use of this assessment, we would want to be seeing like a guy who is he trying to be enhanced? Like, is he getting any sort of performance enhancing outcome from what he could be using, or is he using anything to do that? Or is there even like high normal replacement happening? And no, we don't see any of that. So that's that's honestly what I expected. Like I said in my first video, I don't think he's on steroids. I think he's probably natural. And this is not an unexpected outcome for what I would think. And the urine, he has trace ketones, which is consistent with the fact that he is on a 80% meat-based diet, I would say. Let's see, ApoE genotyping, E3E3. This is like an Alzheimer's risk test as well. He will be happy to know that his mind is not at a heightened risk of deterioration. So negative for the ApoE variant that is associated with increased risk for late onset Alzheimer's disease. Probably the most prominent example of this that was like, I don't know, publicized about in the last couple of years was Peter Attia telling Chris Hemsworth that he had a ApoE4 genotype, where I think he was homozygous for like the worst combination of ApoE genotyping for Alzheimer's disease risk, and it actually runs in his family too, so maybe it wasn't unexpected, but it was, if that happens, it's pretty scary because it's something that you can't necessarily control. All you can do is implement mitigation tactics to try and avoid it, but you are more likely to end up there than somebody who doesn't have it. So at least from a genetic standpoint, I'm sure he'll be happy to know that he does not have share that risk that some individuals unfortunately are susceptible to. And notably, I think nicotine has a pretty impactful effect on offsetting neurodegeneration as well. So if that is anything in favor of his continued nicotine abuse, I would say maybe that's another thing. Not that I would endorse it, but I mean, you know, it's you can look at the data yourself on nicotine for that. What else do we got here? This was a very specific amyloid plaque marker, maybe. I'm not familiar with this one personally, but this is like the intricacies of the executive panel testing that even I'm not familiar with, but goes outside of the scope of the Natty or not discussion anyways. Oh, here we go. HCG, less than 1. So what we expected as well. So he's not manually stimulating Leydig cell activity via HCG to make natural testosterone like manually, because you could otherwise do that if you use HCG. So if this was elevated, it would have been like, typically this is only elevated if you're pregnant or if you're using HCG as a guide to maintain intratesticular testosterone function while you were on steroids, and nothing. So that is another check for him being natural. TMAO, I don't know how I forgot about this, 8.5. That's another marker of potentially a sign to lower the meat intake, maybe, or to implement things alongside it, like diet change a little bit, because this is heavily implicated, has significant correlations with cardiovascular disease as well. Now, is it like, you know, a make or break number? I don't know, to be honest. I would have to revisit some of that literature, but TMAO is something that is concerning, especially in concordance with the other markers that we've touched on. But anyways, this is clean, man. Yeah, anabolic steroids, none detected. No signs of testosterone use. To supra levels, certainly none. TRT levels, I see no evidence of it whatsoever. T to epi-T ratios, even from a threshold detection standpoint, like even if you manually fucked with this and used exogenous epi-T to maintain a normal physiologic ratio, you could be tipped off once this exceeds like 200 nanograms per milliliter. And that is a threshold that WADA would implement to actually look at things scrupulously, even with like a normal T to epi-T ratio as well. And that would be used to get a T level that would exceed natural capacity without flagging things, but would otherwise flag a threshold detection. And he didn't do that. So the guy is not trying to fuck with the system. He is totally natural, in my opinion. And yeah, good on him. So let's see Tristan. Imagine he just ends up on like fucking Tren and Nandrolone and stuff. All right, so Tristan, are you on the Sazul? Belastrone, Boldenone, Danazol, Drostanolone. Nothing. Looks about same T to epi-T ratio, a bit lower of a concentration of testosterone epi-T, which, you know, varies, but it's within physiologic parameters. T to epi-T looks normal. No fuckery of the urine. All looks good. Let's see what he's got. E3 genotype as well, so not negative for the ApoE4 variant that is associated with increased risk of late onset Alzheimer's disease. By the way, E3 is the most common genotype. It is not associated with the risk of increased Alzheimer's disease. It doesn't mean you won't get it. It's just like, these are just things that are probably mean you're less likely to get it, or you're probably at lower risk, but it still doesn't mean like abandon lifestyle practices that you would otherwise implement even if you were E4. So don't get like a false sense of comfort if you are E4. If you're not E4, and also if you are E4, it's not the end of the world. It just means you need to be focusing on this stuff, like, for sure. You know, it's not just something that you can maybe ignore and be one of those guys who gets away with it. The rarities, guys who, you know, smoke to 100 plus and still become centenarians, like you don't want to hang your hat on hoping you're that guy. Similarly to why you would not want to be the guy who leaves unaddressed high blood pressure or an ApoB of, you know, 120, 130 plus and an LDL-C of near 190. These are things to not just assume because I'm metabolically fit and I'm jacked and whatever, that I'm probably fine. Like in the Tate's case, I really hope they take seriously some of the stuff I mentioned about like get the blood pressure fixed like immediately, even if you need to use drugs to do it. Like there's very benign drugs that work well, ARBs, beta blockers, etc. And the lipids, you can manually fix that pretty fucking quick, even if you wanted to keep your same diet. You know, there are some people that ultimately are going to want to stick to like a carnivore-ish diet and don't want to eat a bunch of fucking vegetables and like fucking whatever because they just don't enjoy it. And in those people's case, like, you know, what are you going to tell them? Like, no, too bad, you have to do this. Or, you know, for some people, like, drugs are the answer. For some people, it's not. And you could change it through lifestyle, diet, etc. Or just sleeping more, too. Or taking less than, like, 2 grams of caffeine per day. Who knows? We'll see. But, I mean, they have the information. So, that's, let's see. Some of the other stuff. HCG, also not on it. Notably, undetectable TMAO. Interesting. So, this is, I'm assuming, with a similar diet model to Andrew. So it makes me wonder how like much of a transient blip some of these things are, but it's worth noting. They should probably retest that again in the future. But, you know, at minimum, something that is consistent, that is not changing, is the lipids. I have not yet seen evidence of any clean test result that doesn't look at a insanely high risk. And even if the blood pressure was in check, like I would not assume that the LDL-C and ApoB was fine either, just because, you know, you're lean and you train hard and whatever. Even just like, you know, the family history can't be ignored. You know, what happened to their dad fucking sucks, and it would be a shame if they let it happen to them with the information they have, knowing that with modern technology they could likely avoid it entirely with a relatively low side effect profile, if not zero, like unnoticeable probably through modern pharmacology. And maybe not very minimal pharmacology, depending on what they want to do. So anyways, no drugs that I can see other than probably, you know, obviously they're on nicotine and caffeine. No steroid use, no TRT that I can tell. No testosterone abuse, no testosterone use, even to replacement levels. That would be to like the high normal level. We would see something point itself out, and we just don't. So I kind of expected that. Like I said, I don't know what you guys thought, but let me know what you think in the comments down below. Hopefully you learned something. Hopefully you found it entertaining. This was a massively, this was a long as fuck video. I wish I knew how to summarize. Like maybe I could have summarized this in 10 minutes and been like, yeah, Natty, here's the fucking test results and screw the rest. But hopefully that's not what you think. Although I'm sure some comments will say that. So anyways, let me know what you guys think. Like, subscribe, comment for the algorithm, and hopefully this is, you know, a streak of vids that are coming on a consistent basis again. Feels weird talking in front of a camera. It's been a while. So, all right, that's it. Talk to you guys soon.